All right, that should fix it. Because somehow 360 video got turned on. That was really weird. I didn't know how that even happened.
Yet
So
another learning experience in the journey of Y.A.R.P. We're only, what, 20 something episodes in?
yeah, of course, like this has always been a learning opportunity for us. Um, hmm. So this actually would raise the good question. So when you guys are playing video games, do you value gameplay or story? Like which one do you put more value in?
They're yin
Depends
and
on the.
yang, man.
Yeah. If you have one but the other's bad, then the game's gonna average out as being not that great.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the first Mass Effect game is probably the one I look forward to the least when it comes to replaying because the gameplay at that point was still very rough, even though the story is still really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you
I
need one to prop up the other because of what the medium is.
Right. I think this just kind of just comes from the background of like, oh, story is important, I guess, but like if the gameplay's bad, why am I even here? And I went like that's the not the fucking point. Why you're here is like why the story should be at least somewhat important. I like
Somewhat, but if the game is shit, then I'm going to be too distracted from the story by the fact that the game is shit. It's kind of
uh,
like, what do you value in a movie? Do you value story or cinematography? It's like, well,
mhm.
one is used to tell the other, so if one's bad, the other's gonna fail by proxy. They're interwoven because of what the medium is.
Right. I guess my ratio of like story to gameplay is around like a 70-30 story. Like it's why Metal Gear Solid was kind of my go-to game series because it's like in all reality the gameplay depending on what parts you like and which game you mainly focus on the gameplay's barely there. Like I can play
What do
Metal Gear
you
Solid
mean?
I can play Metal Gear Solid with my eyes closed. And but then I
Okay, that
actually
doesn't
like
mean
it.
the gameplay isn't there.
Or even that it's bad or unimportant.
Hmm. I don't know. I guess this is more just personal bias. I just don't particularly notice gameplay. I just play the game and I'm like, all right, story, great, and I set the controller down. It's why I love. It's why like a lot of people give Metal Gear Solid 4 a lot of shit for just being like a 17-hour movie. I'm like, oh sweet, and I set the
Okay,
controller down.
so if you wanted to look at a game that had story but didn't have gameplay, you'd have to look at like the Telltale games.
Yeah, or visual novels. Would you
Yeah.
play a visual novel?
So with the Telltale games, honestly the problem with those being is that when it comes to their narratives, they don't put enough into them. Would be what I would say because the
Oh,
choices
careful there.
the choices don't matter is what I was going to say.
The
Like
choices do not matter, but that doesn't necessarily mean the story is bad. Most of
it's
them
True.
are. I'll give you that. The
right,
original Walking Dead from Telltale Games was fan fucking tastic.
yeah, and then
Also,
they went downhill insanely.
you've kind of shot your
Absolutely.
own point in the foot right now because
Right,
the choices in that game are the gameplay. If the
right.
main problem you have with those games, despite them being mostly story, is that their gameplay element lets them down, well, then you're right back to considering the two to be interwoven.
Mm-hmm.
You need
Yeah,
the
it
gameplay to make the story meaningful.
yeah. It's why I always point to Metal Gear Solid because it's just cutscenes at some point or another. Uh, then I have you played the Game of Thrones Telltale game? Like that was one of the only ones I
No.
that was one of the only ones I did enjoy other than the first season of Walking Dead. Like I think it's mainly because I'm seeing as I'm struggling to like properly tell that story. It felt like your choices actually did matter in that one, which was opposed to like the Batman one where like your choices didn't really matter. Like
No, that's just a Telltale thing. Your choices do not matter.
mm-hmm. It's just whether or not you feel like they matter, which is kind of bullshit. It's like that shouldn't like the choices should either matter or it's like why even have them there? Would argue.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
especially when you basically market that as your entire thing about your game.
right. One would argue the choices in Mass Effect don't really matter. They kind of still lead
They
to
don't.
some like the same outcome no matter what. Not no
Which
matter
is
what.
exactly the main problem everybody had with Mass Effect 3. It was the biggest criticism levied against the series.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, which
Because they
is like,
kept
which
telling
color
us that
did you?
yeah, they kept telling us that our choices over the past two games were all going to matter and everything was going to lead to this big epic conclusion, and then it just doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Um, in terms of like gameplay only games, like I do like Devil May Cry, uh, but that's
What?
It's not
only
gameplay
That's
only.
not
What are you
gameplay only. What the
talking
fuck?
about?
Dude, you're making me concerned.
Yeah, no, gameplay only would be something like Tetris or Beat Saber or Guitar Hero. Those are
this is
gameplay only.
well, this is why I said like my gameplay chops are not as great as everybody else because I'm like games are a thing. I feel like I've lost touch when it comes to me being a
A gameplay
gamer.
only game would be the exact opposite of Telltale. It has all game, no story, like Pong.
Mm.
It's
Okay, yeah.
literally just a gameplay. There is no story. There's no story to Tetris
Yeah, that's true. There's no story to like
or
Counter
like Candy
Strike.
Crush or yeah. What?
There's no story in Counter Strike or like Pavlov. It literally is just multiplayer. Like, just get in there and shoot the other people.
Yeah, no, Counter Strike doesn't really have a campaign mode or an
It,
actual
or
story
even a
behind it.
background, yeah, or even a background narrative. It literally is just get in there and shoot people in the face.
I think a better example to use for this stuff might be something like Call of Duty, where you had some people like me who enjoyed the campaign of some of those games, but never
Mm-hmm.
cared about multiplayer. Because I
Right.
wasn't in the game for that. I actually liked the story and the gunplay you had on the campaign. I just because of who I am, I was never really into multiplayer in general, especially competing with people I've never met, would meet, or give a shit about.
I guess this is kind of why at the end of the day I just never got Destiny. Uh, because Destiny, like, there's literally a character in Destiny that goes, "I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain."
Yeah, and
Like for
that's how
narr,
they do the entire story for I think the first game.
yeah, that's
We
which
have
is
all
what.
this lore, but I don't have time to tell you about it. You've got to go shoot things.
Yeah, you not only that, you've also got to like read the grimoire cards, and it's just like, then why do I give a shit? uh, what's a what's a good example of like I guess like yeah, this kind of just shows how kind of out of touch with gaming I have become because I normally have just like, all right, I'll play Death Stranding just because it's there, like, and I'm more just listening to Y.A.R.P or watching like Giant Bomb collaborations, like compilations. I mean,
And then you
um,
get into things like what's the space trucker game?
Elite Dangerous, play the shit
Yeah,
ton
that
of
one.
that.
Yeah, so you get into things like Elite Dangerous, Euro Truck Simulator, or for me, it was always things like Civ 5
Mm-hmm.
or one of the Total War games. Things I will play and I'll be listening to something in the background because I just want the gameplay.
Right. Um, in terms of like I can't remember a game so far that I have been playing as of late because I've of course been replaying Witcher 3 and Slayer you have started playing Witcher 3. Well, you actually finished the main story. Um
I've actually
where it's
played
like
through most of the game now because
how'd
I've
you
been playing it almost non-stop to the exclusion of sleep.
mhm.
It's unhealthy.
Would you argue that Vermintide's story is barely even there? It's there, but it's like you're like
Oh yeah, there's
depending
a suggestion of some kind of narrative just to give context for your missions, but that's
mhm.
about it. The game is like 90% just an excuse for you to smash rats and heretics,
Right.
which I'm all for.
Um yeah. What's I'm trying to think of what was the
I think
last
no, the
go ahead.
problem with Vermintide, as Ninja pointed out, is because he's not familiar with the Warhammer franchise. Any lore snippets he gets through Vermintide are effectively worthless because they don't actually
Yes.
tell him what any of it means.
Yeah, I could like in order to explain like just the Grail Knight, I'd have to go into like the whole history of Bretonia, because that's like how like woven their fucking story is, like to that kind of stuff.
Or even
It,
just explaining who it is we're fighting and
mm-hmm.
why. Or like to explain the enemy factions, you have to explain what both Skaven are and who Nurgle is. And then you're getting into chaos and how magic works in that world, and it just turns into a rabbit hole, which is how most of us ended up being inundated with so much Warhammer lore to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be back in a moment. Ninja,
No
you take over
problem.
because this is kind of your point.
It's bullshit.
StarCraft 2 co-op games, like they've got like the thing that gets you going, but to be fair, like it's a strategy game, so how much of a story outside
There's
of the
a
story
ton
mode?
of story in
Uh,
StarCraft.
well, I was going to
That's like
say
saying,
outside of this.
Call of Duty multiplayer has no story, but Call of Duty campaign does. Duh. That's not a remotely fair stance to take.
I was giving it like the comment of like, yeah, the camp like StarCraft's campaign is fucking amazing.
Yeah,
But
that's I don't know. Like that seems like a weird stance to take. It's like, oh well, this one mode of this game doesn't have
well, no, I
a
was
lot of
pointing out
story, and it's like,
of
well,
this.
yeah, because it's not the story mode.
Right, and I was more just pointing that out because of like I was talking about games that I've recently been playing, because the more I think about it, the games like, hold on, let me just bring up Steam since the cover is up. How many games have I been playing that actually even have a story, like, or something that's worth paying attention to? So
I
Vermintide,
would
Blade and
argue that
Sorcery.
you seem to be the type of gamer who doesn't like playing games with stories or prefers games that just have a consistent gameplay loop so that you can do other things while playing the game. Like, I'm not saying you wouldn't enjoy a game with a good story if one came across to you, but it's not what you look for first.
Yeah, because when it comes to games with their stories, like the most recent examples have been kind of drawing me away from it. Like Last of Us 2 was a great example, like a narrative focused game. It's like, oh, but the narrative's shit. And like if I play like games like Witcher 3, like yeah, I'll turn off Discord and all that stuff and just sit down and play it. But most of the time, yeah, I've been playing like Blade and Sorcery and Pavlov, which is just like just kill people. Um, let's see. Yeah, like my recent gaming experiences have been exactly as you said. Like I'm just doing a gameplay loop so I could like throw on a podcast.
Which is fine, like
Yeah,
if
it's fine.
that's
Yeah, it's
what you want to do, but
and I'm sure like once I find a game that's like got a good enough narrative, I will go back into like, all right, turning off the outside world, time to get into fucking story mode.
well, I would argue that one of the games that I play that had like there is story there, but it is very much implied or snippets would basically be the Soulsborne series. Like there's lore there, but you have to really dig for it.
Yeah,
It's
like it's got
mostly about the gameplay.
yeah, it's got like novels worth of lore, but you have to find it as opposed to it just being there.
Yeah, they don't tell you jack shit.
Mhm.
They just kind of drop you in and go, here you go. But the gameplay is really solid, and that's what keeps people going. But as a general rule, I prefer games that have better stories, but I like it to be a bit of both, because you really need to have both.
Mhm. And I used to constantly argue that story was almost more important, and then I'd have the constant arguments with Eli, who would argue gameplay is my ratio is like 70-30. His ratio is like 90-10 gameplay.
Well, that
And
probably explains why he liked stuff like Destiny, because Destiny did have really solid gameplay.
yeah,
It
Destiny
just
has
had no fucking story to speak of.
yeah, and it's like what and to people like me, it's like I don't care if it's got great gameplay if I don't understand what I'm doing.
Well,
uh
I would be okay with that if that's kind of more or less how it was advertised. I mean,
That's true. If
honestly,
it's
that's kind of where Call of Duty is at nowadays, is that there's not as much story for Call of Duty as there used to be, but it's still fairly solid gameplay. It allows them to just release the same game over and over and over.
that's a good
But they
argument.
don't advertise it based on, like, oh, come play the new Call of Duty story. It's like, nah, bitch, come on and get multiplayer and level
Yeah,
up and get cool
get
guns and
in
shit.
get in Warzone and fucking defeat your friends in the battle royale. Yeah,
Yes, but
that's
but
okay.
Destiny was advertised as being by the same people who did Halo,
Hmm.
and like this was their first opportunity to do something creatively on their own without having, to stick to this rigid blueprint. And so everybody was really fucking excited, and we were really excited to dig into another world as deep as people had gotten into like the Halo lore. So there were
Right.
big expectations of what kind of story was going to be present here, and there just wasn't shit. Like you mentioned the Grimoire cards. And there are a lot of games that do like, oh, you picked up a note or whatever, and you have to read it to get more lore and stuff. You couldn't even access the Grimoire cards from
That's
inside the
right.
fucking
That's
game.
true. You had to fucking the mobile app. Jesus
It was an
Christ.
app or a website. You had to literally stop playing the game, go log into this other thing to learn about the game and why you're doing what you're doing.
That's true. If they just had like the Mass Effect Codex, where it's like, yeah, here's the new
They
information,
eventually
like, and
added one in because that was one of the people's biggest gripes was they hated, having to access this information from a totally different method. They were
mm-hmm.
like, "This is stupid. It needs to be fixed." So eventually, they did put like a little console in where you could access your Grimoire cards. But it's like you shouldn't. That should have been in the base fucking game,
No, you should have been in the base game. That should have been part of your pause menu, not a terminal.
right? Like you never should have had to do that, And it's just there was good, there was potential there, and you could see where like things had been started but just left unfinished.
Mm-hmm. That
It was
so
like, oh, look, we've got all these different corporations you can work for. And they had advertised that, choosing which corporation you were going to be part of was going to have like a big impact on how you play the
right.
game or what kind of missions you had access to. Bullshit.
Yeah,
It was which
there's
fucking color palette do you want?
yeah, it's like, do you want Dead Orbit, which is just basically winter camo? Do you want not Future Foundation, that's comic books. Do you want the fucking like any of the other guys that would have been given you like
Yeah,
oranges
there was
and
basically
blues?
black and white, orange, blue, and yellow, or red.
Yeah.
And
And
then I was like, okay.
and you brought up actually that's actually a really good argument you brought up. The way it's advertised can kind of like give you a key on that, because with Mech Mechanic Simulator, it is just advertised as like, hey, it's another one of these games. Here you go. It's like, oh yeah, perfect. For and then, but then there's like Death Stranding. Death Stranding was advertised as like the next Kojima game, and it turned out to be basically half
Well,
walking simulator.
but the
And
problem with the next Kojima game is nobody knew what the fuck that meant.
yeah, no
The
one knows
part
what
that
that
irritated
means.
me about the advertising for Death Stranding was they advertised it as being some kind of like big emotionally resonant thing. Like they basically were like, "Hey, you're going to be fucking sad playing this game. Like something is going to happen in this game that is going to give you some major feels." And it just never fucking happened. And
Like,
I kept waiting for it. I'm like, where is the big investment? Where's the emotional thing that's going to draw me? Nothing. It's not fucking there.
are you saying that more as like a subjective, like it just didn't get me,
No,
or like a objective,
it's
like where
not
is the
fucking
twist?
there. It's not fucking there. There is nothing in that game that draws you into the characters or what's happening in the world. There's a lot of like mystery box shit where they're like, oh, if we figure out what's going on, it's going to be some kind of big revelation. And it's like, it never fucking happens.
Mm-hmm.
You still don't know by the time the game ends what the fuck any of this means.
Yeah, a good, yeah, which is like, I wish that was advertised better as like, if this was advertised as just another day in the life of this character, and like then they go on this grandiose adventure, I feel like, that would have like, that would have probably helped the disappointment impact. I dare say, in terms of how the English language works. Like,
It just, the gameplay loop was a slog. And they I kept up with it because I kept hoping that I'm like, I've played some of the Metal Gear games, at least the ones that I was, pretty sucked into story wise. I know what he's capable of. So I was like, it's
Mm-hmm.
all going to be worth it by the time I slog my way to the end. And then you get to the end, and it's like a giant fucking middle finger. And I'm like, yeah, okay, fuck you too.
Mm-hmm.
Not playing any of your shit anymore. Just done. It kind of reminds me a lot of like Zack Snyder, where it's like he used to do really good shit when he had a studio and a team that was kind of wrangling him a little bit and putting minor restrictions on his creative freedom, because let's be honest, some creatives need that. Like, yeah, be as
Yes.
creative as you want, but you need some of those restrictions to keep you grounded.
One would argue that like having too much creative freedom is how we got like the prequels. Like no one was willing to tell George no, and that's how we got Jar Jar, who is the key to all this. Um, and that's how we get like with this the idea of gaming. That's how we get John Romero. John Romero, fucking, he pissed around for God knows how long, creating Daikatana. It took him like an insane amount of time. It was just faffing around the whole time, and it ended up creating a shitty game because no one was going to question. No one was going to tell John Romero, one of the co-creators of Doom, no. They were never going to tell him that. The only person who was willing to
Well,
stand up
yeah,
to him.
it's like the whole George R.R. Martin thing. He got
Mm-hmm.
successful after a long time. Like, he wasn't originally successful when those books were published, but he
Right.
did establish a cult fan base. And eventually, when they finally did get pick up, he exploded and everybody became a fan. But everyone was like, okay, okay, we're really into this. When are you going to finish? But by that point, he was so busy, traveling around and just sort of enjoying this newfound fame
That he's not going to
that
finish the fucking books.
he's not going to finish the fucking books. He's not. He's too busy doing other shit. Like, there are a limited number of hours in a fucking day. So I get it. It's like you want to do this other stuff, and you're just not focused on it, and that's fine. But just fucking say that.
Yeah, if George
Don't
R. R.
keep
Martin was.
stringing people on that it's like, oh no, I'm still working on it. The book's coming out. It's like he's set his own deadlines 2 or 3 times now, where it's
Yeah,
like, I'm going to go to this cabin and I'm going to lock myself in here for like the next 3 months until the book is finished. And then it's like, it's still not fucking done.
yeah. It's why. It's why it made me laugh when I saw a video of Martin talking to Stephen King, and he was just like, "How do you make your books?" And I'm like, Don't ask Stephen King, because Stephen King makes his books fueled on cocaine and the fact that it's like he's Stephen fucking King.
Well, Stephen King doesn't know how to fucking end a book anyway.
That's true. Uh, the well, when his answer was uh, his answer was like, you got to write like 2 chapters a day, and it was just like, yeah, that would be something that Stephen King would say, considering like he
Well, yeah,
wrote
he
like
forces himself to write these books out, and he's
uh
usually pretty good at like world building and sort of the beginnings of a story.
but he
Like,
can't
he's
finish it
great
to
at
save
setting
his
up that
life.
yeah, he sets up the beginning and the middle pretty solidly, but then we get to that final twist and he just fucking loses it.
It's why like the Dark Tower is like supposed like a lot of people say like it's his best work. When I have not read it yet. I read Carrie. I love the fuck out of Carrie. Um, I have not read it, mainly due to the whole kid orgy thing, because it's just like, Steven,
Oh,
how many
do kid orgies make you uncomfortable?
it's more the fact that it's just like, how high were you, Steven, when you wrote that?
No, no. See, here's the thing. Like, I don't even blame Steven, because ultimately he turned that in, and someone was like, "Yeah, okay."
Okay, yeah. It's the blame also does go on to that publisher. It's like, so
Yeah, it's
Steven.
like, dude, they could have been like, "Steven, what the fuck? Go
Yeah.
back and fix it," And he was just like, "Nah, it's good. Let's put it out like this."
Who was the editor that read a child gangbang scene and wasn't uncomfortable?
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
Yeah, fair enough.
At that point, you can't even blame Steven. It's like, yeah, what the fuck?
Well, you could partially blame him more for the fact that it's like that's his mind that came out of, but at the same time, the most of the blame should go on to the editor for letting that through. Actually, um, so, in terms of that actually in terms of the way the game's advertised, not question, the what we brought up earlier, man, you want to talk about No Man's Sky? That game was advertised as like this like monumentally game changing thing, and then it just would turn out to be this big piece of shit.
Yeah,
I
I
got
have a friend who plays it, and supposedly there have been a lot of post-launch,
yeah,
updates and
there's a lot of
fixes and things like
updates
that.
now, but you're never gonna get the numbers you had when you hyped it up.
No, no, they'll never have that degree of player base or interest in their title. Same thing with Cyberpunk. They will never
Yeah,
recover from the damage that was done from that launch.
yeah, it's
And
like
that's why,
Cyberpunk.
I got so pissed off at Eli when he was like, "Oh, they'll fucking recover." It's like, no, dude, you don't understand what just happened.
Yeah, the reputation of a previously very highly esteemed studio is now in the gutter. There's no
Mhm.
coming back from that.
No, they will always have that black mark on their record. Always.
Yeah,
You were
and
attached to Cyberpunk 2077.
and even somebody like me who like loves Cyberpunk, was starting to see the problems, and it's just like, oh yeah, this is a massive fucking issue. Like,
Oh, I really like the concept, like the world, the idea is great. But I'm willing to look at the product and go, it's shit.
mm-hmm.
I can love the lore and all that as much as I want. Like, I might consider going out and looking at like the tabletop game, but I'm not going to play the video game because it's broken. It's shit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
And
what's the fucking point? And it amazes me that these triple A fucking titles that launch like this are coming out alongside games that are basically fucking masterpieces,
mm-hmm.
like Ghost of Tsushima, like the FF7 remake. It's like we know what the bar should be. We know what companies are fucking capable of. What's your fucking excuse?
Hold on, isn't the FF7 remake only like half the original game though?
It's less than half the original game, but that doesn't matter. It's literally just the first city. But it's the first city stretched into a full 40-hour game. Whereas in the original game, that probably would have been like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. There's a lot of additional content put in there, not to mention substantial graphical improvements
All
At
right.
and a
that
lot of
point,
new
would you
story
even
content
call
as
it a
well.
remake, or is it just an adaptation?
It's really hard to say. It depends on how you want to define it, but it's by the same people who did the original. So
I almost would then say like it's weird how they didn't do like how they're not calling it like a part one then, because there's still game left
I mean, it
technically.
basically is. Yeah, they're not done. There is more.
Right. I know they're not done. It's just if in terms of advertising, it sounds a bit weird that they're just calling it the Final Fantasy remake when it's like you're still missing part of game.
Oh no, I completely agree. They're missing a ton of it. Like we're not even done with the first disc.
um, let's. So should we get onto the video, or does anyone have anything else they want to
Yeah,
chat
let's
about
check
when it
out a
comes to
video.
videos? So we all know how like extra credits is all like in that like heap of trouble with the whole like orcs are basically black people type thing, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is like their second time shooting themselves in that foot with the same bullet. But yeah, I was someone who actually watched extra credits back when they started out on The Escapist, and even then, for a while, I was following the history series just because it was pretty interesting. But yeah, the main video game side of their channel, it's been extra cringe for more than a few years now.
Why is
Because
it
the
that
main writers went over to do history stuff, and the people they brought over they were very much of that new wave of games journalists.
Mm-hmm.
And I say games journalists with like capitalized, like the noun. We all know what a games journalist is.
Uh-huh.
Those guys. They brought over some of those, and since then their takes have just been awful. Or vacuous. They either have something shit to say
Or
or
just
nothing at
nothing.
all.
It's always been fun. But this is not that video. We're not gonna, like, because we had Slur listen to Smudcast, who was also going over that video, and it's apparently not as entertaining as I thought it would be. Correct, Slur?
Yeah, it's really just vacuous and empty. And then I think, was it yesterday E.F.A.P was going to cover that video? I haven't really gotten to that episode yet either.
Yeah, yesterday
But
EFAP covered it.
yeah, it's mainly just they talk about how having a race that's bad by virtue of birth is bad writing because people might think it works that way in real life. And then
That's
they
dumb.
do very little to tie that back to why it's bad game design. Because the second you introduce it into a game, that concept flies out the fucking window. So yeah, it's just them not understanding the basics of fantasy writing or world building for 15 minutes.
Yeah, because there are some races like I don't want to say like by default orcs are the bad guy races, but for the most part they are. Tolkien, like, there was never a good orc in Lord of the Rings.
Well, yeah,
Well,
it also depends on the lore in question as to
Exactly.
why. Because a lot of the time, it's not even that they're inherently evil, it's more they're inherently trying to fucking attack us. It doesn't matter whether they're evil.
Yeah, they're inherently violent. The goblins from Goblin Slayer are a perfect example of that. Because I was like, I believe this was the Weeaboo Bob episode. I was asking like, so if somebody like tried to raise a goblin to be a good guy, it would just inherently just try to kill the person trying
Oh
to
no,
raise
yeah,
it.
their instinct, like a seagull's, is to live by thieving from a more developed race. That's just how they survive. It's what their species does.
Yeah, and nothing will really change it, no matter
Yeah,
how hard you were to
magpie sees
try.
a shiny thing, it will try to grab it. Even if that magpie is like domesticated, it has a lovely, built by humans, cushy, soft, warm nest at home, it will still grab shiny things just out of instinct.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's working from the brain that it has. We have human brains, it has a magpie brain, goblins have goblin brains. It's
Right.
just how they be. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
moral condemnation. It's facing the reality that their existence is a threat to our existence. Evil doesn't enter the question.
Yeah, it's why the scene of Goblin Slayer killing all the babies is like is the way it is. Why it's so shocking. It's just like, no, there's like, it doesn't matter if they're babies. They're just gonna fucking grow up into these like creatures that are trying to kill us now.
Yeah, a baby goblin is a goblin waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And Goblin Slayer will not allow that.
Yeah. But this is not that video. This is more the video is like bad writing, why most games tell bad stories. And I tend to disagree. I love the story of Mass Effect 2. Like that's a great game, great story.
Well, no, just talking more generally, the stories in games tend to be quite simple. That's
Mm-hmm.
not the same thing they're bad.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, simple does not automatically mean bad.
In fact, as long as the game is telling its story competently in a way that makes sense with the rules that the game sets up, then usually it's fine. There's very few I can think of that are actually bad stories.
Yeah, or just bad executions. Definitely, like Last of Us 2 is a bad story, but that's mainly due to like insanely bad execution.
Yeah, it
Um,
goes against things that have been set up already within the context of that story.
right. All right, then let's get into the video. Everybody, watching the screen sharing.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Ow. I don't know if that was
Louder
just
than
my.
I remember.
Yeah, I don't know if
I've
that was just
turned
my.
my stream volume down to about a quarter, so you might want to adjust.
Yeah, I'm gonna fucking protect everybody's fucking ears for a second. Hold on.
Hey everybody, how's it going? We are Extra Credit, and we are here to talk about these. In this series of weekly videos.
Okay, so I legit have like almost no history with extra credits. What's the voice?
I can't remember why it started, but the main guy, he had to do some presentation for college, and he sped up his voice so it would fit within the time frame, and it just became a part of the whole stylistic thing. He has a cartoony presentation. He wanted a cartoony voice to match.
I also was gonna bring this up. I completely forgot. What is it with like escapist people turning into like these Tizzy messes? Movie Bob and extra credits. It's really weird. I don't know about Yahtzee because I haven't watched Yahtzee in like years by this point.
Yahtzee's pretty consistent. He's kind of still doing the same thing now as he was all those years ago. He's
Mm,
actually quite a bit of a comfort on the internet in that way. He's just fucking rock solid. He's been doing this so long.
right.
We're going to be exploring the world of game design. I'll be doing the talking, James will be doing the writing, and over here is our new artist, Allison Theus, providing us with the visual aids. Alright, enough with the introductions, let's get down to business. Our first topic, bad writing in video games. It's a very common complaint. We all love our games, but we can't help but wonder, why is the writing in these things so terrible? Really, how hard is
So you're gonna need to be specific because of just like saying why are all these why is all this terrible? It's like well you're not being specific enough to say
Yeah,
like
he just made the assertion and then was like, "We all know what I mean, right? Right," and
uh,
just moved on. Wait, whoa, hold on, you've lost me.
yeah.
I think he's referring to things like dialogue and the way scenes are spaced out because you're looking at renders of things. Maybe it comes across as clunky and weird.
And
Or is he
also,
talking about games at the time that this originally came out?
when did this originally come out?
I don't know.
Let me throw up the cover for a second. This came out in 2012. Fuck me.
What was happening in gaming in 2012? Jesus Christ. So long ago.
Games released 2012. So Dishonored, Far Cry 3, Borderlands 2, Walking Dead.
It's kind of a moot point until he gives any kind of citation or examples.
Right.
But we know
No.
he's not gonna, so we're trying to
Yeah.
fill that blank in ahead of time. It's like, okay, what games were coming out at that time that people were complaining about the writing in? Because all the games you just mentioned were pretty awesome.
I mean, then we get into the ones that actually were shit. Mass Effect 3, Hitman Absolution, Halo 4, The Amazing Spider-Man. Ugh.
Okay, so of the ones I played, Mass Effect 3, it's really just the ending people have a problem with. The game itself, up to that point, plays out like any other game. I think that's why the ending took people by surprise. It was such a shock how bad it was.
Oh
Because
god.
up until that moment, I was just playing another Mass Effect game. It was awesome. And then this shit.
Oh
But
god.
for Hitman Absolution, if I remember right, that game was just kind of loosely strung together contract missions. So is his thing gonna be the story is often like second fiddle? We just want an excuse to set up context for the game, and that's a problem? Is that where he's going?
Not sure. But in the final nail of the coffin, while we had great games like fucking Mark of the Ninja, Sleeping Dogs, we also had Resident Evil 6. So, yeah, certainly high highs and low lows.
is it to hire a decent scriptwriter? Well, let's take a closer look. It's true, video games have told some painfully bad stories over the years, and there have been more than a few lines of dialogue that are just nails on
so there's his
chalkboard.
example. So he's saying that games have been cringy at points. Here's an example of a cringe game. How did this happen? That's going to be
Also-
the main.
Also,
Trust.
also, I don't know about you guys, but Army of Two is fucking awesome.
Never played it.
So I not
Yeah, it
only
was the shit.
I loved the absolute hell out of it to the point when I saw it at GameStop for like $2, I bought it, and I don't even have a PS3. I have it hanging up on my wall. I'm like, this fucking game is so. It's like it's almost using its cringe in a good way. Like they're like the constant like back to back sections, and then the aggro system, and then the way the characters could like interact with each other with like the using their guns as air guitars. It used the cringe in a good way to
It
reinforce
was
the
self-aware cringe, you might say.
yes, it was the cringe. Like it's the cringe between two buddies playing the game. It's like, oh, we just cleared out this section. And it's like, yeah.
I'm still stuck on the fact that you actually bought a game you couldn't ever possibly play just to hang it on your wall, defeating its own purpose. It's just prime consumer mentality.
Well, if I ever got a PS3, like the first, like again, the that might be the first game I throw back into it. It's like, oh, I found this PS3 for $20, Army of Two, and then just jam it in there. So yeah, the dialogue was cringy, but again, like you were saying, Slayer, it was self-aware cringe. It was pretty good.
Painful to listen to. In fact, I think we've all been downright embarrassed for this medium at times by some of the
Don't you dare talk bad on 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. That is so.
That is like a B movie of games. It's hilariously awful.
Yes, and like that's why
That's
I'm.
just it. You can make this same argument about games and movies. There's shit games that
Yes,
come out, and there's shit movies that come out.
exactly.
This is like the equivalent of one of those films that goes direct to DVD.
It's so bad. It's so good. There's literally a button to swear. You
Yeah,
got
so is the argument he's getting towards that on average, the writing in games is bad? Or is it just when it's bad, why is it bad? How does that keep happening?
mm-hmm.
Because there being people in the world who are not talented is just too simple an explanation? Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know.
some of the ridiculous things that come out of game characters' mouths. But before we can try to find a solution to this problem, I think it's important that we understand something. Video game storytelling isn't just about the writing and the dialogue. Because video games are an interactive medium, the gameplay and the mechanics of the world are
No, hold on. Wait. I'm rewinding that. That make
about the writing and the dialogue. I think it's important that we understand something. Video game storytelling isn't just about the writing and the dialogue. Because video
okay. So he's saying it's not just the writing and the dialogue.
Yeah, it's not just literally the script that you write, it's also how you roll that into the overall product.
Hold on.
Which is what we
Which
were saying earlier.
again, you could say the same thing about movies. It's not just the
Yeah.
writing and the dialogue, it's the cinematography and how you use that writing and dialogue. Like there could be a movie that has a golden tier script, but if everything else about the movie was done incompetently, it probably wouldn't do very well.
Oh, dude, the amount of like low budget auteur movies you see at Sundance festivals and shit, where it's actually a really solid script written by someone who actually has things they want to say, but the budget is so low, and they really only had one camera. Excuse me, one camera that's not very good with the most functional cinematography. It makes the movie way more boring than it ever should be, considering what the script actually is. So you do need both elements to lift each other up.
video games are an interactive medium, the gameplay and the mechanics of the world are just as important to telling the story. Narrative, not writing, is what we should actually be talking about here. All too often,
You establish
Okay,
the
but
narrative via the writing.
I wouldn't describe the gameplay and the rules and elements that make the game fun as part of the writing. It's like they're looking for this other term that encompasses everything, and it's like you don't need that. We already have words for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I slowed him down just a tad, just to see if we can, Like, cause I don't know what you guys. I'm hardly understanding him half the time.
Often, even seasoned professionals talk about the writing as if it existed independent of all other elements that go into game creation.
I mean, they kind of do. Like,
Yeah, it kind of does. The writing needs to be good first, just like in a movie, and then you build the game around it.
Hold on, I think I know where he's building up to. This
what
is
do you
going to be
think?
back in 2012. This is where the ludonarrative dissonance conversation started. So
Oh
it's going to be
no.
how, yeah, if you treat the writing as separate, you're going to have things happening in the story, in the plot, and in the dialogue that don't line up to how the game is actually being played. Which I agree is a problem. It's certainly something we hold against games when we see it being done really heavily.
Yeah, one would argue, like Tomb Raider, the newest one, not the newest one, the new reboot, like, where Lara's like, oh, I just killed somebody, and then like 20 seconds later in gameplay, you're like mowing down dudes. Like, oh, that's a bit of ludonarrative dissonance.
Yeah, so I think that's more the point he's trying to make, where he's making this distinction where in casual conversation, we always just talk about the writing, the writing, the writing. But treating the writing as a separate, isolated thing is kind of how we ended up with the problem we've ended up with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. I'm really just guessing, but I think that's where this all started.
Well, it doesn't, and we aren't going to be able to create compelling narratives in games until we wrap our heads around that. So first, let's answer the big question. What is writing in a game? It's what the characters say in
Hold on, let's see its terms. Hold on.
cutscenes and dialogue boxes. It's those little voice stabs that characters shout out during combat. It's also the background chatter that characters spout as the player passes by. It's the words in the options menu and the loading screens. It's the flavor text describing guns or equipment or alien species. Okay, so it's a lot of things, but I'll tell you what it's not. It's not the high concept.
Okay, hold on. So we'll see. So let's bite down on what he said the writing is. So he kind of pretty much said the writing was damn near everything. Like, he was just like, oh, it's the
Well, yeah,
words that are
everything that
said.
somebody actually had to sit down and type out, that's the writing. But what the writing is not is the themes, basically. So now he's separating the themes from the writing, which is just a different problem of the same stripe as he was describing before.
Video's going all over the place, and it's only a minute, almost 2 minutes in.
Yeah, he's a bit over the map with this script. It's like I said, I'm just guessing at what the problem is exactly he's trying to point at, but really it's more he wants better cohesion across these different aspects of writing, but when he's trying to explain that, he's trying to give different terms to all of them and also change some of the terms that you're using already. So it just becomes this weird, 3-cup game on the table where you can't actually follow his point.
Yeah, that's why he's throwing me for a fucking loop.
It's not the idea behind the game. Few games ever start with a fully baked story that the developer is itching to tell.
So I'm going to
Much
point out that you have him slowed down, so he just sounds really fucking depressed now.
Well,
He
the
doesn't
problem.
actually sound any more coherent.
Well, now I can actually understand what he's saying. When he was talking normal speed, I was just like trying to. It's the movie Bob thing. I can't understand what you're saying because you've eliminated like the spacing between the words. So it's just like, and then the problem with it's just like, okay, sit down, stop it.
less a complete script. Most games begin with a mechanic, or a piece of technology, maybe an art style, or, in some tragic cases, a memo from the marketing department. This means that a game's actual writing tends to be constrained from the start. Writers are often brought in pretty late in the development cycle, so they usually
So I would like to point out that just because a writer may be constrained does not automatically mean a thing will be bad. Like one would say, like constraints is actually what will bring out the most creative thing, which is why we hate it when we hear like what was he supposed to do, such and such, like the Rise of Skywalker. What was JJ supposed to do? He was following the Last Jedi, and it's just like that's no, that's not an excuse for bad writing.
Yeah, the constraints don't necessarily make for a bad result, but what he just said there, where the writers are brought in pretty late into the development cycle, that's that's an issue. Writers need to be there from the start so that
Yes, they
everything
do.
is coherent.
That is very true.
Usually have to work around whatever developments come before them, and there are always plenty of obstacles they have to work around. Sometimes it's a game mechanic that complicates things. Consider those games that feature moral choice systems. If the game's designers decided to put a two-dimensional moral choice meter in the game, the ever-popular good or evil bar, then all the moral choices the writer writes have to fit within those two dimensions. Or sometimes a weird disconnect can occur if the plot and the gameplay conflict with each other. Consider games where
That
characters
you've
can be
actually seen happen, where you've got a good choice or a bad choice, and you've got like Paragon and Renegade and Mass Effect. But
Mm-hmm.
then the game, because it's actually a little bit clever, will go out of its way to present things where there is no right answer. You really just have to dig deep down, discover what your own principles are, and apply them. But then, after you've done that, and the game's actually presented you with this, oh wow, fucking deep thoughts moment, it will then tell you whether you did the right or wrong thing, which
Mm-hmm.
completely undercuts the point.
I would say in Infamous actually does have good consequences for your actions. The only exception being is the Trish uh, choice. You could choose to either help a group of civilians or help your girlfriend. No matter the decision, your girlfriend's going to die, and I really hate that choice. She's either the one person that drops, or she was hidden amongst the crowd of civilians. Um, but most of the other choices, such as like who gets the food and who doesn't, like it's these major like it impacts the world around it because it's basically an apocalypse happening after what is essentially a superpower bomb activates. So it's like who gets the food, who doesn't. I'm trying to think of the other choices. Ninja, did you ever play Infamous?
No.
Okay. So I was the only one.
I would make the argument that these bars for, good and evil points aren't necessarily a bad thing on their own. But what would make it more interesting is like what Slur was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Don't directly show me the results of my choice. Make the bars invisible to the player, but still calculating a total.
That's actually not how I would go about it. In fact, if I was really going to really hammer in on that one thing where eventually you're going to be presented with things that aren't obviously good or evil, where you do have a good and an evil bar, but towards the end of the game, when you're making your final choices, no matter which one you pick, there is no result on either bar. Because
Mm-hmm.
whether or not what you did was good or evil, that's something for you to reckon with.
That's why I love The Witcher 3's moral choices. They kind of just they like there's not really pointing out which one's good or evil. Except
Actually, yeah, I think
I would argue the tree choice is kind of that question is like is one of
which
them the when you can defeat the crones and release the children by releasing that devil from the tree, that like that demon tree thing.
oh, is that what that was about?
Yeah,
Okay, see,
you
you mentioned this before about like when you deal with the crones, you can release the children. I never actually saw anything to do with the kids when I went back with the Baron. But that mission where you find the beaten, pulsating heart thing deep in
yeah.
the forest, I found that just while I was exploring, and it was this whole
Oh,
side quest for me.
okay, so you did the accidental third route where both the children are saved, and then you can keep the Baron's wife alive, basically.
accidentally got the best ending. Nice.
Well, because
There is one
well,
thing in that game, by the way, I noticed that was wrong because there's actually a choice in the beginning of the game. When you're in White Orchard, you can choose to make a Witcher potion for this sick
yes,
girl.
the little
And if you do it, she basically gets brain damage because Witcher potions are very poisonous,
yeah,
but
they're
she's
toxic.
alive. And you later on meet the soldier that she's betrothed to, and he's just like, honestly, it might have been better if you just let her die with dignity rather than this. And you're actually left to reckon with it. There's no bars. You're not given points in one category or another. You're just, you did this. This is what happened. How you
Yeah,
feel about it is up to you.
yeah, it's not like the Horson Junior choice where it's like the obvious answer is actually to kill him.
Oh yeah, there's no fucking doubt that man needed to die.
If you spare him, he ends up being like a beggar on the streets, and it's like that's not good enough.
Later on, I actually figured that if you spared him, Dudu would have to kill him to replace him or something like that. I figured that's how they would roll it back.
Hmm. But
There's
we get
also the problem I noticed was, in the Blood and Wine DLC, you
yeah
get all this lore dropped about higher vampires and how they're like basically unkillable, blah blah blah. You remember how Dandelion's girlfriend was attacked
yes
by a
the
serial killer who turned
y-
out to be a higher vampire, who I
yeah
now learn I didn't actually kill?
no you can ask him, you can ask Regis about that, and he was just, it's like, oh no, he was bullshitting about being a higher vampire. You just killed a regular one.
That feels kind of cheap, but I'll take it, I guess. Hmm.
Well, no, they said
Anyway,
it was
we're on
that it
weeds.
was a that was not a striga. It was that it was the a regular vampire that evolved enough to be able to take human form, but it was still not a higher vampire. Okay.
So
We
he was a
revived.
middle vampire.
Mm-hmm.
That
Oh, hold on. No, fuck this. With the whole, like, you could have just used Phoenix down on Aerith when it's just like, yeah, that's a bit of a fucking, like, I don't even want to know if I want to call it a plot hole when it's a gameplay thing. It's like, oh, don't worry, Aerith. We could just use Phoenix down on you and then you'll be right back. When it's like, whenever you use Phoenix down on somebody, they're not dead. They're knocked out, if I remember correctly, with the Final Fantasy terminology.
No, they're dead.
When their bar reaches zero in
That
the fights.
that's literally why they call it a phoenix, because you're bringing them back from the dead.
Okay. Then
There are other arguments about why this, her being dead makes more sense. It, it is a problem from the writing standpoint, but in a weird way, she wanted to die, so she kind of had to for the rest of the story to happen.
mm-hmm.
So it's really not as much of a problem as they like to make it out to be. Because if you had Phoenix downed her, she literally would have gone and gotten herself killed again. Like, in order for the final events of this game to happen, she has to be dead.
Yeah, not to mention, I always, since I had never played Final Fantasy VII, I always assumed, like, oh, maybe Aerith was just dead for too long for a Phoenix down to work.
No,
That was always my...
no. You literally arrive as she's like praying by herself, and then Sephiroth drops down from above and fucking impales her, and she dies right in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is...
But she dies in a very holy place, and she died praying because she wants to rejoin the live stream and help save the planet from meteor.
Right.
If she's not dead, that doesn't work. So the whole planet dies. Good job.
During
Alright.
gameplay, but then they die in the plot line, and oh, awesome, my Phoenix Downs are worthless now. I'm sure you can all think of game mechanics like this that constrain a writer's options, but what other parts of development can act as roadblocks?
I mean, like, the opposite could be done. It's like the cutscene damage trope. Like, in gameplay I can take X amount of bullets, but then in a cutscene John Marston gets like shot in the stomach and then damn near dies in the beginning of Red Dead 1. It's just one of those things you just like, I don't want to just dismiss it. It's like this is a thing that games just do. It's like I don't know how we would necessarily fix them without like, because if it's up to the writing, then it's just like, okay, just make sure it's consistent.
Yeah, that's exactly how you fix it.
Mm-hmm.
You make sure that what happens in cutscenes matches what happens outside of cutscenes.
Yeah.
No one do things in cutscenes you can't do outside of them. It's a very simple rule.
Right.
Unless you're just trying to make things happen.
Which is why it always made me laugh. I was just like, oh, I can take 9 bullets during gameplay, but in the beginning of the game he took like 1 bullet. Then in the end of the game when John does die, he dies in a hail of bullets. It's like, fine, he can take all these bullets, but can he take all the bullets?
So right now in of this video, we've downgraded from the writing in games is bad down to there are tropes in video game writing that are very easily fixed, and there's really no excuse for them to still be around. That doesn't mean the writing overall is bad or that games are bad at writing. It just means that there's some really shit tropes in the medium, which there always will be.
Yeah. We can all try our best to avoid them, but eventually 1 or 2 might sneak past us.
Well, that's the thing. Like, tropes on their own are unavoidable. They're just patterns in the way stories are told. It's cliches, I think, is a better term. There's the cliche of cutscene death, where even if you could have avoided it in the gameplay, the cliche is that because it was a cutscene, it's just because the writers wanted a thing to happen, and this is how it's happening. Fuck you.
Mm-hmm. Also, it does actually beg the question of difficulty. Like, because I'm trying to remember, I think it was Actman or it was like Halo Follower. They asked like what the novelizations of like the games, what difficulty would they essentially be on?
Normal.
And
because that's what's normal in that world. It's not that complicated a question.
No, a lot of people argue that the books basically take place on what would essentially be legendary difficulty, because then there's the whole like this is how it's meant to be played type deal.
If it's how it's meant to be played, why wouldn't that be normal? Also, then, if you're looking at different games where bumping it up to the highest difficulty necessitates things like food and drink and sleep, if that's how the difficulty goes up, then yeah, by default.
Well, then also there's damage modifiers and that kind of stuff.
But yeah, it feels like a very strange question. What difficulty is the novelization on? The difficulty doesn't apply because nobody's being directly challenged with a thing.
Well, it's more like when somebody takes a hit that normally in the games you could shrug off, and it's just like, oh, but if it's the higher difficulty, they wouldn't be able to shrug off that thing, so then it would make it more accurate. It's a dumb conversation at the end of the day.
It's really
you can bump a book up to the highest difficulty so the writing just gets really fucking small and then an obnoxious font.
Well, it's like in the novelization of the first Halo, Chief damn near died because an infection form latched onto his armor. Like that kind of stuff.
Blocks. The art is a big one. It influences the entire feel of a game. It establishes a mindset for the player and the personalities of the characters. You can't go writing a light, fluffy script for a game with a gothic horror aesthetic.
You can! It's called like...
Yeah, in fact, that would be hilarious.
It's a romance game. It's like I'm trying to remember, like somebody played it for Valentine's Day. It's literally a dating sim where you're trying to get a kiss from Cthulhu. And it's really fucking funny. It's like...
I'll take your word for it.
I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's escaping me.
Well, actually, that could be pretty awesome. You get what I mean, though.
Oh, they literally kind of just described how it was, because that's the ending where you do get kissed by Cthulhu literally was basically that image, but all anime. Like...
But there are other elements of the art pipeline that can get in the writer's way, too. Comparatively small things, like animating voice-acted cutscenes. Very few games are reanimated or re-lip synced when localized for foreign countries, which means that the character's dialogue is automatically constrained to the length of the original sound file, regardless of what language you're localizing them from or into. Voice acting itself has an enormous impact on what a writer can write.
No, it doesn't. Like the writing is still there. The performances can just be different. Resident Evil is a good example of this. The writing is separate from the like, what is this place? Jill, the master of unlocking. Like it's like, yeah, a writer had to write that, but at the same time, it's like a pretty good voice actor could have said that better. Like it's
Yeah, you hire a voice actor after the script is written, so whether the voice acting is good or bad is on you.
mm-hmm.
You
We've all
just need to
seen
make sure the
million
script is good.
dollar cutscenes just ruined by bad voice acting. We could do an entire episode on
fuck off.
I hate it when everybody says the fucking laughing scene is bad. The laughing scene is actually a very great moment between Titus and Yuna. It's what establishes their fucking relationship in all reality. Like, because I think at that point, Titus had learned his fucking dad is the main villain. So we needed to let off some
he's
fucking
also in this foreign world. He's fucking scared. He's bonding with her because she's scared, but he doesn't really fully understand why. All he knows is that her job is kind of fucked up, but he doesn't know to what extent.
Mhm.
He's the only one on this fucking journey who doesn't realize she's going to her death.
And so
And
when
he's trying to make the best of it, and everyone else is literally wincing in the background.
Yeah, and
Too afraid to tell him, hey, by the way, you're falling in love with a chick who's dying.
Yeah, and not to mention the whole like that's why Yuna's the one who says like maybe you just need to let out a laugh, and then of course the ha 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 ha, and Yuna then says like, oh, maybe you shouldn't do that anymore.
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't do that anymore.
And then they both do it, and it's like, and then I think Waka says like, oh, we thought you guys all just lost your minds.
Yeah, no, it's acknowledged as weird, even in context.
I hate it when it's used like, oh, Final Fantasy X is goofy because of the laughing scene. It's just like, fuck off.
I think it's more that the laugh itself has been taken out of context so many times and used in memes that it's all anyone remembers.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't remember the actual context of the scene in which it took place.
Mm-hmm. They just know ha 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 ha. It's just like, oh, there's a lot of context behind that. And you're fucking in with it.
voice acting, and we probably will. Even programming and production issues can interfere with the writing process. How good is the game's dialogue parser? How good are the internal development tools for branching dialogue trees? Oh, and remember, you can't go writing storylines that the dev team doesn't have time or money to develop. Alright, so it's clear.
That's why the script should be done first.
Yeah, so far the only thing we've agreed with him on is that the script should be done first.
Because then they know the limitations.
Yeah.
And we've agreed with him on, like, well, agreed by massive indirect tangents that might align with what he's going for, that the disconnect between what happens in the narrative versus what happens in the actual gameplay is an issue. It's a very bad cliche. That's fine. We agree.
Clear that there are a lot of development issues that influence game writing, but trust me, that doesn't mean I'm letting the writers off the hook here. Let's take a look at what's going wrong on their end. First off, many game writers are actually hired from outside the game industry, and they don't really understand how to write
Hold on, I'll let him finish.
for an interactive medium. This is all pretty new stuff, and they just don't have any experience with it. They don't understand.
Not that fucking new. Games with stories have been around since the 90s.
Yeah, this is really weird because I'm just like, what are you talking about? Because
I'm guessing what he's trying to say is these are people who have probably successfully written books or written a screenplay for a movie, and writing for a game is similar, but not completely the same because of the interactive medium, but I would argue that depends entirely on the game.
Yeah, it depends on whether or not your game actually has like choices, or if you're just like, here's the thing, you can't influence what Dante is going to do. You just do the thing, and then during the cutscenes he's almost entirely out of your control.
Well, but that's the argument of, is this story choice driven? Like, is the player character supposed to be an avatar player, or is the player just inhabiting the shoes of an already established character who they're going through a narrative? They don't have choice.
Right.
Yeah, it's like with God of War. One of
Yeah.
my favorite franchises is you're just kind of inside Kratos, this murder machine fueled by sheer relentless rage. I think, what was it, Yahtzee called him like the world's most determined atheist?
uh Maybe. I don't remember.
I can't. I think it was Yahtzee said, but it's my favorite description of him because his whole purpose is just to go on a rampage, destroying gods.
I think
But
it's
yeah,
I think a good example of like an in-between would be The Witcher. You're kind of on Geralt's journey, but you're able to make the choices that would make sense for his character. Like,
yeah, your options are limited to things that would align with him depending on his mood, but the outcomes of your choices radically affect the world.
right. Hell, whether or not you let Radovid sorry. Whether or not you
Did I let him catch? God damn.
No, sorry, a pretzel went down the wrong pipe for a split second. Whether or not you just break Dijkstra's leg can basically decide a war, actually. Like, I'm not kidding with this. If and when you're trying to walk away with the owl lady, and Dijkstra is just like, hold on, you're not getting out of here. If you just choose to break his leg, Radovid automatically wins the war.
See, in my playthrough, his leg was already busted, so I assumed
No, you could break.
that was just
You
a
could
thing
break the
happened in
other
previous
one.
game.
No, you could break the other
Oh,
one.
he could have two bad legs. God damn.
Yeah, and me not understanding that, I did break the other leg in my first playthrough, and then I doomed the world to basically witch hunts and burning people at the stake. It's like, oh.
Wait, when does this choice happen?
I think it was Philippa, the one that can turn into an owl.
Yeah, you find Philippa in the bathhouse. You have to convince her that you're not trying to kill her. Then you try and walk her out, and then Dijkstra gets in a huff, and
Yeah.
then
You can either
I
choose
can't
to
remember
like.
what exactly you say. You
You
just
can
like she's more useful alive. You
No,
know?
you could trade information, say something, or you could just break his leg and go by force. If you just break his leg,
Oh.
then Radovid just wins the war. Yeah, it's that bad. And I also then say, like, man, the pressure of this one decision should not just decide the fate of the world.
Yeah, that seems a bit much. Whereas something else like where you choose to actually do the mission where you facilitate his assassination, it makes sense that that would determine whether or not he wins the war. You're taking a direct action. That feels
Yeah.
way too indirect. I don't see how
Yeah.
those dots connect.
Well, it's because, like, I think it was like, if you do that, then the mission can't happen. So therefore he wins the war, and it's just like, no, then I think the other characters that are involved with this assassination would just take over.
Well, not just that, but it also implies that if we don't kill Radovid, he is absolutely obviously going to win, and that's really not the case. The Empire is fucking huge.
It's because Radovid got that. If you talk to the briefing guy, Radovid got a major boost of numbers during the winter. Like, that's why they're so evenly matched now.
Fair enough.
Back to this.
And that in an RTS game, when you give an order to a unit, its acknowledgement should be maybe only a second long, tops. Or that nobody wants to read huge blocks of text in a game. These types of
off.
Nobody has ever needed that explained to them. It's like every writer knows you don't put a massive exposition dump in the beginning of your book because people need to be hooked in before they care enough to read it.
What he
Yeah.
was showing was literally a quest pickup from WoW. Like that's the information and lore associated with the quest you are accepting from the quest giver.
That's not fair because depending on the way you tackle MMOs, you're not paying attention to that in the first place.
I read every single fucking one
Yeah,
because I like to know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and who I'm doing it for.
that's fair enough. I prefer more MMOs that are like SWTOR, where it's like cutscene, moral decision, that kind of stuff. But it's like that's clearly the outliner. That's clearly the outside of the of what a normal MMO does. And there's Black Desert. Black Desert is just like la da 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 da. Keep fighting things. You don't know what's going on half the time.
Yeah, we didn't play a lot of that game, but what we did play, we understood almost none of.
Yeah, and whereas I was perfectly fine with that to avoid reading, you guys probably were like, oh no, we need more.
But no, I didn't care about it being just mindless smashing things gameplay if it was the three of us, because I care more about being able to talk to you two than anything the NPCs are going to say anyway. It's more just that the game itself wasn't good on its own anyways.
Right,
There was-
because the moves got really repetitive depending on what class you are. Like, it was a very big mixture of things.
Yeah,
Writers
also the controls were obnoxious.
often come from a background where dialogue or text account for the majority of their audience's engagement with their work, but this simply isn't true of most video games. Consider a TV show, even an action-heavy one. In 1 hour of footage, you probably have at least 20 to 30 minutes of dialogue, but in 1 hour of gameplay, you'll often have less than 10 minutes. Our medium
Depends on the game, my guy.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of this whole video is like it depends. You know, there are very vast. I would even say compared to movies, there are more different types of video games than there are different types of film. So they're going to vary greatly. You know, like you said, there are games that have hour-long cutscenes. You
I
know,
was going to
just
say,
slammed right in the middle of stuff.
yeah, Metal Gear
And
breaks this immediately, because, like, 1 hour, this could be an entire, like, half of a cutscene.
yeah, it all depends on the game and what they're trying to do with it. Now, if you're
is
only talking about one certain type of game, then sure. But just to throw this out there and be like, this is all games, it's like, no, it's not.
Yeah, it's like if you're just trying to do like an action game or like a hack and slasher. Yeah, the dialogue might not be that heavy because you're honestly just moving on to the next set piece to then kill a bunch of creatures. But then you compare it to something like a JRPG
Well,
where like the dialogue's actually pretty important.
yeah, I mean, even like the old Dynasty Warriors games, those are pretty much definitive hack and slash. Not a lot there, but there's tons of dialogue that's relevant, and it's how you learn the story. There's tons of, you know, cutscenes. There's tons of additional lore that you can read about the characters, the locations, the weapons. You know, all of it. It's like it depends on the game. Even one of the biggest hack and slash games of all time has plenty of lore and story in there. It just depends. It's all about the execution. You know, there are good games and there are bad games when like it more depends on whether or not the creator gave a shit.
Exactly.
enormously compressed because we have so many other ways to convey narrative to the player. Which brings me to our last point, the general failure to create stories from an interactive perspective.
What?
Slur, I feel like you need this just because it's a picture out of context.
Ooh, I love things out of context.
Yeah, I feel
It's a gigantic panda blasting a hole through a night with a rainbow spewed from its mouth. What's not to like?
Oh god, I remember the motivational posters. The precursors to real memes. Like,
Yeah.
literally, just everything they added to the picture, crop it away. Just post the picture without context. Everything else is implied. Fucking Christ. We really thought these were going to be the internet sense of humor forever, didn't we?
We did.
We did, and we should be ashamed of ourselves, actually.
Oh fucking hell! Do you remember Rage comics? Jesus, the cringe.
That was
It's
the
too
ones with the.
strong.
Those are the ones with the yellow smiley faces, right?
What? No.
Hold on.
Okay, you know things like the troll face.
Yes. Oh
Yeah, they
right.
were the
Yeah,
comics
that's
that those things came from.
sorry. I don't remember the style that it's called, but it's the one with like the big like what were the precursor to emojis. Those were the types of comics I was thinking of when I was asking that.
Ah, all right. Well, no, this is just a very early internet kind of meme.
Right. YMS uses a lot of them for his videos, like the big like type face before his video starts.
Video games are a fundamentally different medium from all other mass media to date. You can't just write for it using old techniques from different media and expect it to work. You wouldn't write a movie script the same way you would write a novel. And you wouldn't write a newspaper column the same way you would a stage play. So why would you expect writing for video games to be the same as for any of these other media?
We're
Uh,
not
Because
saying
there
that
are a
they-
lot
Kind
of
of-
similarities. There's a lot of foundationals that apply to any and all of these.
Yeah, there's a reason there's a novelization of so many movies and so many movies of novels. It's because the two can be translated pretty effectively.
Yeah, and also you could pretty much write a script and have it translate to a video game because instead of like insert fight scene here, you could then go insert gameplay here. Like if I'm being very generalistic, of course.
Or if
Games
you're gonna
can't
go
tell
from,
their
say, a novel to a game, there are parts of the novel you can actually make playable. So
Of
we'll
course.
take Lord of the Rings as an example. There's games of those uh, books and movies where the sections where you're traveling, you will actually do some of the traveling. You will actually traverse a level of terrain and overcome obstacles between A and B. Or the battle scenes, you will actually play in the battles.
Yeah, you will
You
be
will
at Helm's
fight orcs
Deep.
and do all that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you're not necessarily going to be crossing Gahadras. You're more than likely going to be like heading down into Moria.
so you don't write one the same way you do another, but the concept of what will and won't make sense, what is and is not something that we can leave up to either a description in the novel, a few establishing shots in the movie, or a playable section in the game. Those spots, there's going to be a lot of overlap. So they're not really that different. The concept of good writing, meaning it makes sense, it's coherent, these characters are established in ways that we understand what they're doing and why. All of that's pretty consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And you would across all mediums because that's just you're writing in all mediums.
stories through disconnected segments of gameplay strung together by cutscenes. Games need to tell their story through the gameplay. Narrative should drip from
That's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I'm gonna
I
kind
mean,
of. That's really fucking weird.
again, I would point to something like Soulsborne, right? The gameplay does not tell the fucking story at all. The gameplay has very little to do with the story. If anything, the only story you get is through the background, through the environments, through a handful of NPCs that you might interact with. But that's one of the reasons why I prefer Bloodborne to the other ones, is that story-wise, they're all pretty much basically the fucking same. But Bloodborne has a much cooler aesthetic, in my opinion, so that's the one I gravitate towards the most.
Not to mention, I personally find Bloodborne to be narratively a lot more engaging because there's more chances to get hooked with it. You can find the other hunters. You can like talk to the people through the windows. It's
You can do all of that in all the other games. That's my point. They're basically all the same. It's literally just a matter of, well, do you like fantasy and dragons and shit, or do you like, eldritch horror stuff?
Well, I was more saying with Bloodborne, there's more opportunities of that because with what I have played of the Souls games, like of what I played with Dark Souls, there's only like 4 people that I have been able to talk to. Like of the
But you
black.
haven't found everybody.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
every texture and be integrated into every facet of the world. It should come through in the menus and in the interface and in every loading screen. But most importantly of all, it should come through in the mechanics of the game. The mechanics should teach us about the characters and reinforce the plot line. They should fundamentally attune the player
Okay,
to their character.
how do the mechanics of Final Fantasy make you think that Cloud is emo?
Yeah, the mechanics of Final Fantasy are that they're turn-based,
It's
retro
turn-based
JRPG
combat. Yeah. So how do the mechanics make him any different than, say, Barrett or Vincent or Red 13? It's like that's an aesthetic argument. He looks emo because of his hairstyle. He acts emo because of his personality, but none of that is involved in the mechanics of the game.
There are examples I can think of where you have these moments where things that are happening in the story are shown to you, or you feel them through things that are happening mechanically. Like in the new God of War, Dad of Boy, where your house is attacked by was it
Balder.
Balder? Yeah, Balder is coming to your house and he's threatening your family and is just awakening that rage that Kratos hasn't had to deal with for a while. So your actual in-game rage mode comes back. And that's how it comes back, and that's why it
Also,
comes back at the point.
and also it's they tied it with the narrative in the perfect way of like when you're doing that boss battle and he's like, all right, I'm gonna go see who's in that house then, and then the rage meter almost instantly builds because it's like, oh, that means he's gonna fuck up Atreus, and then he just bursts from the fucking mountain and kicks his ass. Like, yeah, it's a pretty good, like, just one of those moments where it's like, yeah, that's how you tie in mechanics with the narrative.
Yeah, but that's something that you do in those very specific little moments, whereas he's
Mm-hmm.
presenting it something, it has to be kind of constant. Where, yeah, you can look at the way Kratos is animated, the way his moves actually feel when you're using them. Those very much fit with aesthetically how he looks. He's a big, burly, brolic motherfucker, and what we're told in the story that he's anger incarnate, basically. So yeah, you can have those elements of the actual gameplay line up with the narrative, and we're like, yep, that checks out. Or you can have something like retro JRPGs, where we're told it's like, oh, this is a super intense battle. These people are fighting for their lives, but I'm gonna wait my turn to attack because that's how the fight works.
Mm-hmm.
So
Just
yeah,
want
I can kind of see where he's going for this, but
I think that's why I always appreciate Chrono Trigger's gameplay, because Chrono Trigger didn't like have that. From what I remember, it wasn't mainly just waiting around with the like waiting for you to take your turn. The enemies were on timers, and if time ran out, they'd attack you, just like in an actual fight. You don't get to. There's no waiting your turn.
And let them explore their character's actions. I know it sounds like I'm asking a lot, but we've seen it done before.
Hold on. You can't say like exploring the player's actions when you use Link. Link is a blank fucking slate for the player. Link doesn't have a personality most of the time. There's
Yeah, he's like
instances,
Master Chief.
yeah, there's instances where he might have a personality, like Wind Waker. Wind Waker is a great example because that Link is very expressive. He's very emotive. It's not like Ocarina of Time where he's just kind of just like got three faces most of the time. He doesn't really react to much in the same way the other Links would. And then Master Chief in the original Halo games, like especially in the first one, he was kind of just quiet for the most part. Like
Yeah, no,
like
he actually has a character in the books, but in the games he doesn't.
yeah.
Not
And then they
he's
tried
literally
putting
supposed to be a blank slate for the player.
yeah, which is why people were really confused why in 4 and 5 they were basically giving him his book personality kind of. They were just like, this isn't Master Chief, and it's like, oh, but that's because you never established who Chief was until this point.
Or consider the Silent Hill games, excluding the most recent ones. Their combat mechanics reinforced the weakness of their characters. Think about the Dawn of War series and...
Oh, hold on. No, don't. Okay, so let's talk about Silent Hill. So, I'm not as well known in terms of actually playing Silent Hill. I've just watched a lot of Silent Hill related stuff. So, the combat is not what I would point at the most when it comes to bringing up the atmosphere of Silent Hill. I'd bring up its complete background, it's just its atmosphere in general. The first Silent Hill, you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. That was mainly due to draw distance, but they found a way to work that into the narrative, and it made you all the more scared because you couldn't see what was in front of you. You didn't know what was out
That
there.
is that is mechanics and narrative lining up nicely, which is
Yes.
clever on the development part. But when it comes to the combat, it's more the fact that you're literally just some guy.
Exactly.
You can't do combat rolls. You're not this expert marksman who's gonna, check his corners going into every room. He's just, I am lucky that I even have a gun.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can kind of see what he meant by the example,
But he
but
worded it
even
weird.
then, yeah, it's more to do with the wording. His point of these are examples of when these things actually do line up. We're still left to dissect how and why, and whether that's got anything to do with the actual writing. Because those few examples that we've listed there the last while, none of them have anything to do with the writing in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Not really. It's more just the writing is consistent inside and outside of cutscenes, which just means it's not doing the cliche we pointed out earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations. I mean, we love to see it. And
So what's
I'm just thinking now, is that the whole point of his video? It's just to point out that one thing, that cliche of things being mechanically different in cutscenes or in text and stuff, and making it more lined up with what happens mechanically in the gameplay. Is that all he's asking for? Because it feels like a very roundabout way to do that.
feels odd, to say the least.
Alright. But now he's talking about Warhammer.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, considering what we like that, I might show at like the end of the stream. I might show the Warhammer little short that I shared with you, Slur. But it's like, oh, don't talk about Warhammer.
Bear in mind, this is not the same guy. This
I-
is a different person. So maybe he
true.
knows. Maybe.
how much flavor is packed into each race's voice stabs. You understand what it means to be an orc simply by hearing them go about preparing for war. Games like Shadow of...
No, not for
Yeah.
war. They're war. Okay, sorry.
But no, yeah, he's just saying it's like something as insignificant as the little voice stabs for units can actually go a long way to explaining what they're about.
Yeah,
Which is true.
well,
That
such as
yeah,
like
that's fine.
yeah, you can very much tell like the personalities of each space marine based around that, such as like that one guy who just wants more corpses and he uses a big fuck off thunder hammer.
But I'm still wondering why most games tell bad stories.
Yeah, that's not really, he's not really doing a good
Yeah,
job.
I agree with him. That is
Of
a
the
very nice thing about the Warhammer strategy games.
Yeah,
They
that's
give
why
the characters lots of personality. Is his point that, you see, most games don't do that good thing, and that's why, in general, games tell bad stories.
and it's like, ooh, you missed it.
Yeah, I think you might be in the weeds.
Colossus, Demon Souls, or Bioshock deliver a great deal of narrative through their world and the environment alone. Even the Katamari games delivered a new kind of whimsical narrative through their artistic style, mechanics, and use of sound. Look, here's the key to take away from this.
Oh, are you guys ready? This is basically his conclusion.
Okay, yeah, lay it on me.
The development team must be conscious of the narrative of their game from the outset. The game's narrative should be considered as all of the elements of the game are created and assembled, because every part of a game helps to tell its story. Well, I think that about covers it.
What?
Okay. All
I
right,
want
so
my 6 minutes back.
yeah, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but generally he's just saying games that are just there's the gameplay loop, and they brought someone in to make a very loose narrative that gives some Vermintide 2. They had the gameplay they wanted to have, and they have this very loose overarching plot that just gives context for them. Don't do that, because that game is telling a bad story. Instead, do this other stuff.
Which, I
But
mean, technically, Vermintide doesn't tell a good story.
yeah, I mean, technically it does not tell a good story, but is that games in general? Does it
No,
even
it's
apply?
not.
Because if you're going to talk about the things in games that we would say are either bad writing or cringy dialogue,
Well,
a
and
lot
I
of the
would
ones we're going to
argue,
bring up are story games. Things like The Last of Us 2, where the reason that game tells a bad story has nothing to do with when the writers were brought in.
yeah, and I would argue that Vermintide not telling a good story doesn't make it a bad game. There are certainly bad games that don't tell a story, but I wouldn't point to that being one of them.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I guess that
Where's
just
it?
goes back to what you said earlier. Is like, is the game being sold as a story experience, or is it being told as an excuse to slaughter things?
Yeah, are you
Right.
do you just want to keep hitting the buttons, or are you actually like supposed to give a shit about what's going on in front of you?
Thanks for watching, and see you guys next week.
So that was extra credits.
Yeah, and that's back when they were actually not extra cringe. So
Mhm.
this would be one of the videos from that era I talked about when I still watched them. I think I might have even seen this episode before. Just so long ago, I don't remember.
I'll say it's pretty shit. Like he really didn't say much.
Yeah, it's
And
why
that's, I
I
think, what you're going to actually find if you go back to a lot of those old episodes where it's not that they were actually saying anything that was bad or really wrong. It was just kind of vacuous.
it's kind of why I'm kind of just browsing YouTube casually to be like, man, that was such a nothing burger. I almost want to throw on like something else just to chat or facilitate a
Nope.
conversation. But apparently, nope.
We hit our 2 hour mark, man.
We're at
We
like an hour and
watched
a
one of the
half.
videos. It's because you restarted the fucking stream.
Does that count?
I think it does.
I, I would say no. Uh, but yeah, sorry guys that this is such a short one. Uh, we were supposed to have like guests this time, and unfortunately, stuff didn't work out. So, and we will be taking a 2 week break to work on sort of our own stuff. And so we'll be back on when like gotta look at a calendar. When we be back, we will be back on the 2nd.
Oh, yeah, we'll be back in May.
Yeah, we'll be back in May. So don't worry, we're not. This is not just suddenly the last episode. You guys will see more of us. We just need to kind of recharge our batteries and work on other shit. So, thank you guys all so much for watching, and we'll see you in those 2 weeks. Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.